Yes, you're about 9 minutes. I'm going to make sure the volume is working on this.
Rabbi Bycel. I know this name quite well, but I can't. I'm sure I've met him. Someone, so you should know him. I apologize.
So they
And I lived in California for a while.
Okay, so maybe that's
I have to slow down this. Our lives have passed, I'm sure. I'm Nathan Cody, one of the daughters. And I know your name. I hear you. I've spoken to her twice. Before that, I was in the Bay Area. I was in Berkeley. Yeah, we did. I was in Berkeley. It was about the 70s for my second job. I was in the University of Pacific. On and on. Came up here. I've been at well, I started in Portland State in 76. Yeah.
Testing.
Two questions. What was your context? What was mine? Well, I've been in the Army, went to San Francisco State, came to Berkeley in 62. The oldest student wisely said, I think, December of 64, I'm sorry, you're going to have to fight this gather. This was with 16. I was too old, too wise. So, long story short, I've been in Portland State for 30 years. Shakespeare and Holocaust studies. But I've been, I can't say I'm tired of I'm very tired. I went to slow down thing my way down. But I'm very active. I didn't really an international Jewish group that opposes this is an American I don't know that word. There's no word. Okay. This is a long before that. It's about 15 years old. Yeah, good. Yes, and thank you for coming up here.
It's a pleasure. Great sitting here. You do.
Lady, it's J Street.
Oh, J, of course, yeah, J Street, yeah. They're doing really good.
They've been doing the work. It's just a hard time.
My husband's from my parents in
I think they should sit while you do something. I think it'll just be. It's it's the collab. It's Rabbi Bycel. Yeah, so that's that. Yeah, they had a meeting here this morning and Junior speaking with them. Yeah, it's making me so we are take it away. Nobody wants to sit smart. She's supposed to be not secret. Yes, well, what, there's Chinese here, so it's just back to the okay, well, there's that one there. And that one's for, yep, thank you, yeah. Wait. Just wish people would sit in the front row. Thanks. He wants to join me in the front. One more people person on the front row. Okay, we can do this, right?
Hello. Hello, is that better?
Yes.
I think I'll just spend my music. Thank you to all of you who joined us on this unexpectedly beautiful day when I wrote this, but now it's raining, for an important conversation with Rabbi Bycel and OJMCHE Executive Director Judy Marbles. I'm Liz Lipoff, President of the Board of Directors here at the museum. I also want to thank OJMCHE staff members who are here with us today. Gail Mandel, Chief Operating and Advancement Officer, Director Mariah Berlanga-Shepka, Head of Public Engagement, and Heidi Kaufman, our Regional Museum Educator. This program is the second of two programs held to commemorate Kristallnacht, the night of November 9th, 1938, 85 years ago, when Nazi officials ordered the destruction of all Jewish businesses and synagogues in the Greater German Reich, which included Austria and part of Czechoslovakia. Kristallnacht translates as Night of Broken Glass, in reference to the broken glass that filled the streets after the windows of Jewish-owned stores, buildings, and synagogues were crushed. In that one night, 1,000 synagogues were razed, 7,000 Jewish businesses were destroyed, nearly 100 Jews were murdered, and 30,000 Jews were imprisoned in concentration camps. Kristallnacht marked a significant turning point in the persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany and is considered a prelude to the Holocaust. Today, as we are mindful of the tragic events in Israel and Gaza, and increasingly aware of the alarming rising of anti-Semitism around the globe, we are especially grateful to be able to hear from Rabbi Bycel, who will talk about his work with refugees and how, even in the darkest times, hope and action are possible. Lee T. Bycel is a rabbi, teacher, and author who, in addition to his rabbinic work, is a humanitarian activist who, in both his professional work and personal commitments, has sought to make life better for the most vulnerable among us. He is currently the Sinton Visiting Professor of Holocaust Ethics and Refugee Studies at the University of San Francisco. He has also served on the board of Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger, and as executive director of the Redford Center, which cultivates creative, action-based solutions to today's most compelling civic, environmental, and social challenges. He is the past president of the Los Angeles County Commission on Human Relations, and between 2014 and 2019, he served on the board of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Today, He serves on the United States Holocaust Memorial Council, having been nominated by President Barack Obama, and is a senior moderator at the Aspen Institute. Rabbi Bycel's humanitarian work has also taken him to refugee camps in Darfur, Chad, South Sudan, Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Haiti, where he secured much-needed funding for the medical clinics in refugee camps. His book, Refugees in America, was published in 2019. I confess to cribbing a little information from Amazon, as I have not yet read it, but now I really will, and it's available in the museum bookstore. Refugees in America weaves together a rich tapestry of human resilience, suffering, and determination by focusing each chapter on one individual from a different country. Giving a voice to refugees from such far-flung locations as South Sudan, Guatemala, Syria, and Vietnam, the book provides illuminating background information on the refugee crises in their native countries to help reveal the real people at the center of political debates about U.S. immigration. And, if you're not yet impressed, profits from the sale of this book are donated to 2 organizations that are doing excellent refugee resettlement work and offer opportunities to support refugees. HIAS, founded as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and International Rescue Committee. Join me in a warm welcome to Rabbi Bycel and, of course, Judy Marbles.
Okay, I have a mic. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and a really warm welcome to Rabbi Bycel and his wife, Judy, who's over there. I love your name, as I've already made very clear. So I think we're really gonna have a bit of a wide-ranging conversation. Of course, we're in the midst of a harrowing war right now. We will have a chance to address that too. But I do want to just start off by just a simple question to start you off. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself, talk a little bit about your work, and I know we're looking at images behind you at the moment, and I think you have things to say.
Great, Judy. Thank you, and thank you all for coming out this afternoon. And Judy, this is a magnificent museum. I got a chance with your friends Gail and Erwin to see it prior, and it's really a lot to take in. Very powerful, beautifully done, Judy, and really admire that. And Liz, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here in the Portland community. I just want to say a little bit about these in a minute, but I'm very mindful of being here in these times, the stories we all carry, the pain we carry, and we're going to get into that later. But I've been in Portland twice in the past 35 years, I have to come more often. But I'm very mindful of being in this city. As I saw the exhibit downstairs, I see the history of Oregonian jewelry and everything. I'm mindful of the years that Rabbi Stephen Wise spent here. None of you were around then, I wasn't. But here was one of the greatest leaders of American jewelry. Comes from New York City, spent 6 years in Portland, where he was a champion of human rights and social justice and many of the issues. And then he goes back, and many of you know the story of Rabbi Stephen Wise, to become a international leader. But it's great to be in the city where he spent some time and to see his work carried on in so many ways. I wanted to just say a word about each of these slides, and then we'll get to Judy's questions. So if we can go back to number 3, that would be great. Is that possible? And then I just want to introduce these people very briefly. So if we go up, so this slide, my journey into this world, and I'll go into it more later, but it really began in September of '04. About 9 months prior to my visit to refugee camps in eastern Chad, I started to hear about the genocide being conducted by the Sudanese government in Darfur. Most of the Darfuri refugees were able to flee to one of the poorest countries in the world in eastern Chad. Bless you. And I spent 2 weeks in 3 refugee camps in eastern Chad. Why this woman? I don't know her name. I talked with her a little bit, but someone photographed this, or I photographed it, I remember it's 20 years ago. So often when we see pictures of people in sub-Saharan Africa or women in African garb, we see them smiling. This woman's face, to me, accurately reflected the plight of the refugee. There's little to be happy about. She's got a sick child that was coming to one of our clinics, which a clinic is a tent, basically, with a few medical supplies. And I was so taken by that look on her face, because to me, I look for images that bring us into the world of what it is to lose everything. And we'll talk more about that whole picture. But I wanted to, I'm here, I had the privilege of writing this book, but it's not my story. I carry the story of the 11 people I'm privileged to have interviewed, to have gotten to know. I bring them into the room with me, so I'll just say their name and their country, and that's all for now. And then we'll put these down. Maren Semidar, Eritrea. I'm blanking on her name. Asinja Badel, Iraq, a Yazidi woman, so double trouble, basically, for Asinja and her family. Sidonia Lax, of blessed memory now, Holocaust survivor, unbelievable story. Walita Sanguma, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This woman, Vanny Kien, or she goes by Kien actually, not Van. Kien is from Vietnam, and this picture's on the front of the book. She's holding the picture of her husband as they fled on a boat. He perished on that boat, and she went to Oklahoma City and raised 7 or 8 kids. Kien. This is Darwin Velasquez, El Salvador, a DACA beneficiary, incredible man. Naomi Perez, Guatemala, survived the nightmares of Guatemala to come to Los Angeles. Dane Jankovic, one of the magnificent lost boys from South Sudan, who spent 1 year walking. Maybe we'll get a little bit into Dane later. This man's name is Malk Alramash, Syrian refugee, and I saw Judy show me the magnificent pieces of the names from Syria. Malk and his family live in a town called Clarkston, Georgia, which is the most diverse group of refugees in America. I had the privilege of going there a number of times, meeting with Malk and his family. This is Vanny. She is from Cambodia, survived, and you have it downstairs, the nightmare of Pol Pot, the horror of it. She lives in Oakland, California. Vanny. This man is from Afghanistan, Jawad Kawari. Jawad and his family fled Afghanistan. He was a man who served as a translator, really with our troops, and his journey of getting out, his journey of coming to America. He now lives in Virginia, and he has a whole career down there. I think that's it. We can put that light down there. So I can stop sweating. Yeah. That's why I'm here. These people, I carry them with me today here in our discussion.
And I just want to thank you by giving them a name, because I think that is, I think part of the work is to actually name the people we're working with. So often we talk about Cambodian refugees and Syrian refugees and Afghani refugees. So I think it is really important. We are going to have very shortly, we're going to ask a few questions to sort of lead up, and then we're really going to dive into your work with refugees and immigration and lack thereof of immigration policy. We're going to get to that. But Liz pointed out, of course, that we are on the cusp of observing Kristallnacht, which it commemorates, as Liz said, the invasion in Germany and Austria, and the murder and the looting of businesses and murdering Jews, etc. So let's just think about Kristallnacht for a little bit, which I'm sure you do anyways. And are there lessons we can draw from Kristallnacht that have helped you in your work when you're thinking about prevention of genocide, prevention of discrimination, prevention of enmity?
The Kristallnacht coming up next week, the night of broken glass. And to me, there's a couple things that I'm very mindful of, especially this year. How do we, because we only can live in our time. I think anyone here this afternoon, and everyone has a powerful story, and I acknowledge that. Everyone has a history. None of you fell from the sky here. All of you have your own story, connections, all of this of why we're here. what does it mean to be vigilant in our times about the real threats that are going on? And here I'll just talk about America, of what are the threats to democracy, this incredible spike in anti-Semitism that we've seen in the past number of years, and especially since Israel was attacked on October 7th, and we have the Israel-Gaza war. What does it mean to be a Jew in these times? How and what do we take seriously? Do we see an anti-Semite behind every door? Just because one is critical of Israel, does that make them an anti-Semite? Anti-Semitism is real, and to me, I applaud those groups that are being vigilant about them, but I urge them not to be overly vigilant. I think there's a danger of seeing anti-Semitism anywhere and everywhere. We all have stories, we all have opinions, we all have feelings, and it's been, we'll talk more about Israel later, it's so integrated into the Israel crisis. Where does anti-Semitism stop? And where does legitimate criticism of Israel start? And I think that's an important distinction. But we, those of us who are here who are Jewish today, need to ask, what does it mean to be very small in number in America? How do we best represent the Jewish people? And just on this, couple more thoughts. The conversations that have been the most intriguing to me since Israel-Gaza started is that the calls I get from non-Jews I know who live in areas. I work with a guy in the Central Valley in California. Very few Jewish people down there. There are some, and he's not Jewish, Catholic, really knows nothing about Israel, Gaza, Jewish, but he's curious. He wants to learn. And to me, anywhere and everywhere where we interact with people who are curious, and we all do, right? How do we take the time to walk them through the narrative of what our history is, but what the current reality is, but how blessed we've been in America? And as Judy knows, I was part of the beginnings of the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles, which celebrates the story of the Jew in America. So we can't forget the celebrations, but we have to be mindful and vigilant. Now, that being said, next Friday night I'm speaking in Marin, the congregation where I started my career 45 years ago, and about Kristallnacht. And I was just weighing it and weighing it and weighing it. I'm not doing it. So let me tell you why. I'm going to mention, many of you know the work like I do of Leonard Cohen, that in the cracks we see the light. This is a cracked and shattered world. How do we see the light? And the light that I see, and it exists in Palestine now, it exists in Israel, there are people doing great work, is I want to celebrate on Kristallnacht people who were rescuers, the righteous among the nations who had what I call moral courage, women like Irina Sendler, who did so much to save Jews. And I could spend a whole talk here talking about righteous rescuers. And to me, it's not ancient history. And that's what I love about downstairs and the Eleanor Roosevelt quote is that it's all here. What does it mean for us to have moral courage? When do we show moral courage? The questions that raises, because I taught Holocaust and genocide for many years at University of San Francisco. It gets depressing. And I realized these young people, they know horror better than probably we did in our time, or those of us who are of a certain age. But they know nothing about rescuers. I've spoken in so many places, have never heard stories of Raoul Wallenberg, or Irina Sendler, or Eddie Hillesum, or we could go on and on. Let's uplift for those stories. So in the cracking of Kristallnacht, my message is to be vigilant, but to celebrate the light that comes in the cracks.
Thank you. You'll be glad to know we're trying to do an exhibition on artists that Varian Fry saved.
Oh, very Fry.
That is
Wonderful.
That is in our
Fantastic.
yeah. So give us a few years. Well, you are so accomplished in so many ways because you mentioned that you have taught you have definitely taught about the Holocaust and genocide. I do actually just want to read a quote from you, and then the question for you is, why is it important to teach about the Holocaust and genocide? I think that is a worthy question right now. So you did write, most of all, I teach Holocaust and genocides because I will never give up the belief that the world can be different. These are more than history lessons. They are a lens into the depravity and the goodness of human beings. I teach this painful subject because it raises the question of what it means to be human, to have a conscience, to get involved and not stand idly by, as well as to help emphasize the importance of nurturing our empathy, our moral courage, and our humanity. That's definitely part of the answer, but I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, you know, you think of Cain and Abel, sometimes I wonder how far we've come, right? How far we've come from Cain and Abel when all around this beautiful planet of ours, and here I will use men in a very specific way, men who've been the perpetuators of so many genocides and hate crimes and all this around the world. To me, to work with undergraduates and to hear their questions and their grappling, and why did this happen? How did the Nazi regime, how did they ever gain the power? Why did so many people stand idly by? Why are so many indifferent? When I hear the story of one of the people you highlight down below, Raphael Lemkin, a story I love. Raphael Lemkin, a man who coined the term genocide, but he gave up everything in his life. His story is a remarkable one of him going to the US Senate and him running to the Capitol or walking to the Capitol to work and to work with every senator and to work with the American stand on genocide and everything. Remarkable people. I want people to understand and to go deeper the facts. And I want to say this carefully because facts do matter still in our world. To understand the facts, but to understand what goes beyond the facts. Why do people do this to each other? How did Hitler ever come to power? He never elected, but he came to power. What is it to see a movie, a Nazi propaganda film like Triumph of the Will, which I highly recommend, very long, but you can see what German people bought into, because it was after World War I, and Germany, the Treaty of Versailles was brutalized in many ways. Hitler seized on the moment and captured people. How do we all fall into that? So to me, to teach about Cambodian genocide or Rwanda, which you have downstairs, it brings people into our brutality with the hope of raising awareness. How do we never repeat this again? How do we never become brutal and soulless in our own lives, in our own communities, with our own people? So to me, but we all have to know our limits. I reached my limit of teaching it because it became too painful, especially in these days. But there's a younger woman now teaching at University of San Francisco. I celebrate her. She brings a new energy, a new perspective. But to me, supporting wherever Holocaust and genocide studies are done is critically important because we live in a world where often we forget history. And history, there is a lot to be learned from. If we're crystal clear, what are the lessons? And help undergraduates and graduate students to get them.
Thank you. And I forgot to say, I always forget, but there's going to be time at the end for you to ask questions as well, so start thinking of them and we will welcome your questions. I think that is a good segue to the current moment. There's this verse from Exodus, which of course you're familiar with. I think many of us have this verse in our mind right now. The verse is, "You shall not wrong a stranger to oppress him, for you were a stranger in the land of Egypt." So of course these verses direct us to remember that we were strangers in Egypt and that empathy and support for those who are weak and in distress are demanded of us. So of course we do want to get into talking about the way that these words helped inform you to write Refugees in America, this book, and that empathy and support for those who are weak and distressed, that we need to pay attention. But first, I do want to give you this opportunity. You've already mentioned this crisis, the war, the harrowing events that it began 29 days ago. I just want to give you an opportunity to comment. And I'll just say to all of us, it is a very painful subject. We know this. I was actually in a conversation this morning where I'm just like barely able to speak. I think we're also distraught. It is a subject that's going to lead to passionate and diverse responses among all of us. So I'm just asking everyone here today to approach this part of the conversation with empathy and open-mindedness. So thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, Judy. In a certain way, I have nothing to say, and I have a lot to say. And I love how you introduced it. A couple weeks ago, Judy and I had people at our house, and someone brought it up. We were sitting outdoors in Berkeley area, and I said, I'm only willing to discuss it in a certain way, which I'll talk about. We'll get there. October 7th. Hell on earth, right? Hell on earth. For any human being who cares. We saw the bestiality of the 21st century. And we don't really yet know all the stories, I can tell you that. The terror, the horror, the beyond belief brutality of the Hamas attack on Israel. And like all of you, shocking, horror, probably turning to all of our news sources, trying to grapple with what it means. And now a month later, right? Here we are, November 5th today. What is often forgotten, I'll try to say this succinctly, in the everyday discourse, because, the famous Supreme Court Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes, he once said, how do you get to simplicity on the other side of complexity, right? That's the goal in life with everything we deal with, because, you can ask me a simple question, I can say, oh, that's too complex to go into right now. But if you say everything's too complex, well, there's nothing to talk about. But how do you get to simplicity on the other side of complexity? So for me, it's put in the following way. Israel has every right to exist. Every right to exist. Many, many years ago, and I'll say this about Israel, Israel has not done a good job of PR in general, and American Jewry, we've not a great job. But about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there was a brochure I was given where it was a white cover and a little yellow dot in the middle, and no words on the front. And you open it up and showed that yellow dot of Israel and 26 Arab countries surrounding it, right? Israel has a right to exist and does exist. Secretary Blinken has it right. In my estimation, I'm not a political analyst, there has to be a Palestinian state. There needs to be a two-state solution, which will be painful, agonizing, but what's the alternative? Without a Palestinian state, we're going to see this over and over and over. To me, that Palestinian state has to be created with not just America and Israel, but the Arab world. In my estimation, the two countries that don't want that to happen are Iran and Saudi Arabia. Many of you may remember the 90s, in that era of peace with Jordan and Egypt and the Palestinians. There's so much going on. I only have a little bit to add because my comments are incoherent in a way, inchoate, unformed, but I would say the following. On Thursday, a very dear friend who I've been very close to in the past year especially, he is a big supporter, Jewish guy, about my age, big supporter of Jewish Voice for Peace. Some of you may know that organization, not one that I'm comfortable with. He is anti-Zionist, absolutely pro-Palestinian, views Israel as the culprit of everything. We have weekly lunches. He's been out of town, so we haven't met since this started. We met. I dreaded it. I absolutely dreaded it. But it started with him talking about how upset he was when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th and the pain that caused him. And then we went on to discuss other things. But for me, what I say about the world we're living in now, and I saw the PLO, the Palestinian rally yesterday, I get it. I get the narrative. Israel now as a power is not done the best job on human rights, and that doesn't make me anti-Semitic or anti-Israel or anything. If I'm going to be critical of the American government or other governments, I can be critical of my own government and what's happening with judicial reform and other human rights violations. But the real conversation, where I'm really interested, Judy, is in the room of pain and anguish and horror. What does it mean for us living here in this country? What does it mean when we see that Palestinian rally? What it means we hear from some, not all, from the river to the sea, or that Israel cannot exist. Those are really painful, really scary, really horrific. But again, what I want to say is, how do we hold out room for conversations, but that are in our wheelhouse? I'll just end you by saying, and later I'm happy to take any questions. I know I think of Rabbi Bycel often, my hero, who I had the privilege of meeting a few times. And he talked a lot about the Palestinians and their right to exist, their right to a country, their right to life and liberty, just like we see downstairs in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But how do we meet human being to human being? What does the news make us? You ever watch even CNN, or Blitzer, Jake Tapper? These are all good people. It's one analysis after another. It often doesn't help. You all get the narrative. We all get it. We might have different political views. But what does it mean to be living in this time in Portland, Oregon, or in San Francisco, California, or in New York City, and to care deeply about both Israelis and Palestinians, to understand that the narrative, I remember I was in Berkeley in 67. Nathan, you were probably still there in 67. You remember then, every dorm room had the Israeli flags. Now it's the Palestinian flag. I get it. I don't resent it. I'm trying to hold it and saying, what can we do? It's not now. Right now there's so much pain. Well, we have dialogue. And again, some of you may be, I'm not. We're not strategists. We're not, I have a friend. So just I always respect people in the arena. I remember when I heard Dennis Ross, I heard him directly after the 2000 talks break down, or the negotiation stuff going on now. We have a friend. He was governor, some of you may know what Governor Richardson did in the hostage negotiations. My friend, our friend, an Israeli decorated captain, came to the States many years ago. He's the one, you sort of might have seen him when he brought home the boy from North Korea who died, I think on the plane ride home, or whatever. Mickey Bergman was the negotiator. Mickey's now involved, but he can't say anything. I don't know what's going on. What I notice is everyone's become an expert. Because I think we're scared of our own emotions. We're scared of our own fear. This isn't Israel of 48 or 67. Nothing in the world, and I think one has to say it unequivocally, justifies what Hamas did. But I was explaining to a non-Jewish woman in Napa, where we know a number of people, who was very curious. And I tried to use the example, this isn't a great example. I said, if I worked for you here in your little barbecue store, restaurant, and you didn't treat me well over the years, I wasn't valued as an employee, and I was disrespected, and there were employee violations, and I came and burned down the restaurant. Is that justifiable? No. But what Hamas represented, and they are a terrorist group, and the Palestinians, we need to, I'll end this. Where do I get hope with this part? You can ask me anything else, or anybody can. These stories I was reading about the other day in the paper, an Israeli man and a Palestinian man, who both had daughters killed by the opposing parties. They're part of a group of 400, 500 people. As they say, a member of a club, you don't ever want to belong to the death of children, anywhere in the death of children by war. They're working together, and they've been interviewed even since all this is going on. They all believe that there's got to be an end to this by the creation of a Palestinian state. They all believe that the current reality has to change, but what I just want to hold, I know what I feel is pain, anguish, powerless, demoralized, and I'm looking for glimmers of hope from that region of moral courage. And I'm also looking for people who hold respect. Hamas doesn't speak for the Palestinian people, and violations of human rights does not speak for the Israeli government. But how do you defend yourself? And I'll just end with this, Judy, because I see it very personally. I'll be 75 in a few weeks. I know you thought I could pass for 70, but you have to use humor, by the way. Yeah, 60. What if I had been born in Israel in 48 1967, that would have been my first war, 19 years old. 73, 77, then my sons, they would have fought in the 80s and 90s. They would have still been called up in their 40s. That's a different reality. I've always held respect for what is it to live in that existential reality and to be threatened by a world, by people who say, we don't want you to exist. Where do we find the Nelson Mandelas on both sides who say enough is enough? But if you fill your life with hatred and anger, it goes nowhere. But if you can find a way to go to empathy and compassion, that might lead somewhere. So I don't know if that's helpful or anything.
Thank you. You were not incoherent at all. In fact, I'm very moved by what you said. I will just say parenthetically, the Palestinian man and the Israeli man that you were talking about who both lost daughters, actually the subject of an utterly brilliant novel by Colin McCann called A Paragon. If you haven't read it, read it. It is just a work of poetry. He's a great writer. So, yeah. I feel like we should take a little 2-second pause. I really appreciated that. And as Rabbi Bycel said, we can get into more of this in the question period. But I think for the remaining time, let's talk a little bit about the subject of refugees in America, and just this sort of overall arching goal I think we all have is to turn any kind of hope we might have, and we all know we're kind of facing a pretty hopeless period right now, but how do we turn hope into action? So, of course, we have been, for a long time, we are wrestling with the implications of borders and global human rights obligations. Next year is 2024, and it's actually the 100th anniversary of the Immigration Act. So in 1924, and maybe some of you had family who were really affected by this. 1924, the American government literally just closed the faucets, right? Said no more. They started with an Emergency Immigration Act in 1921. 1924, it was over. This was a period of huge immigration to the United States. There were 2.5 million Jews who actually had come in between 1880 and 1924, and millions of other kinds of refugees, right? So our country is still facing, we just don't seem to know how to respond to the crisis of immigration and the plight of refugees who seek asylum in our borders. So what should we be doing? So the question is kind of twofold. What do you wish our elected officials are doing, and what can we as citizens, we as decent human beings, what can we be doing?
Okay, so a little bit, and I love the question because it's great to meet people who know the history and the context. And you look at the history of immigration policy in this country, and even 1882 in the Bay Area, we know well the Chinese Exclusion Act. We didn't like people from China, even though they came and built our railroads. We wanted to get rid of them. And then the Johnson and Reed Act of 1924, a significant milestone, 100 years. When you look at these immigration policies, and what I try to boil complicated law and all this down to some simple things that I can try to wrap my hands around without losing the complexity. I think what 1924 represented, Judy, to me is the following. Immigrants went from being viewed as an asset to being viewed as a deficit. This country is built on immigrants, right? This is the immigrant experience, blah, blah, blah. We all know the story. But somehow, and maybe it was because of the 2 million Jews that came between 1880 and 1920, but it was also anti-Asian, Chinese, Japanese. We didn't want Asian people. And when you dig deep, I mean, the numbers went way down, but what's very interesting in immigration policy in America was that it went from 3% to 2% based on who we are. So if America's population was, I'm just making this up, was 2% French in 1924, we allowed 2% of people to come in from France. If it was 2% Argentinian, we allowed 2% of people to come in from Argentina, or whatever percentage. That means if there was nobody really, and the immigration period of 18, 19, 20 didn't really matter. So we wanted people who looked like us, right? That's what we wanted. Then you got the 20th century, since 1924. There's only a couple things I'll refer to, and I'll go to the heart of the question, Judy. We've seen so many great attempts in our life. The attempts by Senators McCain and Kennedy, they were great. George W. Bush, he pushed for comprehensive immigration reform. Didn't pass the Senate or wherever, it didn't pass. President Obama tried his heart out. I wrote my book because I saw America failing in a policy of how do we welcome refugees, asylum seekers, displaced people, all the categories, migrants, failing that elected leaders, and that even we had fallen into political rhetoric rather than the human story. So I went apolitical on this. I wanted to capture the lives of 11 human beings. What happened in your country? What happened in Guatemala? For Sidonia, what happened in Poland? For Naomi, for Marin, what happened in Eritrea, a country we know little about? What happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Your journey to America and your life in America. How's that gone? Because I believe change happens when the heart is touched. Change happens through policy. I'm a big believer in policy change, but an example, and the most important thing on my resume isn't on there, I guess, is I have 5 grandchildren. Beautiful grandchildren. I have a 6-year-old granddaughter with Down syndrome. Great human being. She teaches us about the heart in so many levels, but how do I help create a better world for Ayala in her life? So Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, he appointed me the State Council on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Like all state bureaucratic work, it's boring as hell. Forgive the language. I don't really like the meetings. And when I went to the first meeting, I wasn't going to ever go back. But they do something that connects to this story, and even all my work on refugees. On that council are 30 people in California. 10 people are like me, family advocates, a child with autism or Down syndrome or a variety of other intellectual and developmental disability. 10 people run state agencies in California, and 10 people are self-advocates. People with Down syndrome, people with autism, people with what a table that makes. What rich conversations. And again, to me, when I meet someone who it affects, when you hear Dang's story from South Sudan, that touches the heart. But what can we do? It goes from having our hearts touched, that we too are like that. Many of you have roots in Eastern Europe, in Germany, Ukraine, of pogroms, of the Holocaust. But how do you go from that to policy? To me, we need a complete revision of how we're going to welcome people to this country. And by the way, I will say, because I will give credits when I see brilliance, look at the former president's narrative about build the wall. In a certain way, it's brilliant. We like walls around our house. All of you have walls, by the way? You all live somewhere, an apartment or a house. And I'll never forget in a refugee camp, and this was actually in Darfur. I went one trip into Darfur, very dangerous, very problematic. And I was in a refugee camp in Darfur, and these are all tents, the camps I went to. And a guy had built a little wall in front of his place. Now, it's preposterous. If a rebel group came in or other groups came in, they could burn down the tent in 1 second. But walls provided a number of our fellow Americans with an image of keep them out. To me, I want an immigration policy that is just, is fair, is compassionate, that affirms people who came here like DACA beneficiaries, people who are living here, people who contribute to our economy, but yet says we've got to come up with reasonable limits. And an old friend, when my book came out, he said, "Oh yeah, Lee, congratulations on your book." And he said, I didn't read it, but I know what you're saying. And I said, well, I'm curious, what am I saying? He said, well, you're for open doors and open policy, let everybody in. I said, well, I'm curious when you read the book, tell me what page I said that on. I'm not for an open door immigration policy, but how do you balance who and what we are And how do you balance what is just and reasonable to people who are wandering this earth? And as of today, Judy, the latest UN statistics, 110 people, 10 million people between internally displaced, refugees, asylum seekers. I've always said in my book, by the way, when it came out 4 years ago, I said 69 million, which was the UN statistic. I think they're way off. I think it's double, triple the amount of people wandering this earth. So who do I applaud? But I'll give you an example where it's been very tough. Chancellor Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany. I got a chance to go there and see what they had done with Syrian refugees. She let 1 million Syrian refugees come into Germany. Wow, what compassion, what heart. And I will tell you, in Germany, what a mess. They're still trying to figure it out. I've been to the displacement centers there. But I applaud the compassion. I applaud the empathy. It can be figured out. It can be done. But I think what our political leaders need to hear from us is voices of heart, voices of reason, saying we want you to figure this out as a top priority. What is an immigration policy that is just, sensible, and compassionate? So I think we have a lot of power, by the way, when we call our congressional people. They mark it all down. When we call anyone in the political arena, and also when we elect political leaders that are going to show some sense of fairness and compassion and sensibility, both to people who live in this country and those who, nobody, the Warsan Shire, whose parents, as she lives in England, her parents are refugees from Somalia. She said, no one wants to leave home unless home is the mouth of a shark. Most people don't want to leave home. Come on. We can't take everyone in, but how do we rebuild countries where they can live? How do we look at Guatemala, what happened there? America's part of that. I'm not going to go into the whole history of Central America today, but we talk about the Golden Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador. A lot of those problems we caused. Well, do you take everyone? What do you do with Venezuelan refugees? What do you do with refugees from Ukraine? Most refugees in today's world are still Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Syria. We're not crazy about Syrian refugees. They're Muslim. We're scared of them. What does it mean? So it raises deep moral questions. But to me, they should be part of our conversation, and we should be pushing our political leaders through letters and conversations to engage in this in a serious way, which they're not.
Thank you. More to think about, but I won't take a pause because we have questions. So let's just talk a little bit about the 11 individuals in your book. There's a diversity of voices, there's a diversity of countries that you're talking about, which is great, and you seem to navigate between a particular viewpoint and collective perspectives. So I do want to ask you, and you alluded to this early on, you are an outsider, right? And so how did you feel you could appropriately tell these stories that weren't your own story? And it's actually a problem, I think it's endemic to the work we do here, because we really, we're no longer only talking about Jews during the Holocaust and the Jewish experience. Our human rights exhibition has brought us into this whole different realm.
So just briefly on that, or a little bit on that, I think what allowed me to get into a lot of these interviews were my, what I would call high language, my street creds. That I had been in all these places that Liz had mentioned before. I've been there. It took a lot of introductions, a lot of work to get to people, because in general, and she's very open about it, when we had the book debut in Berkeley, she came and spoke. Vanny Loon, the woman from Cambodia, she's a woman living on the edge of mental health trauma, and basically every day is a trauma for her, whether to remain alive or not. Very hard, this was true of Holocaust survivors. It's very hard to get to those people who are depressed, and I say that not judgmentally, I get it, who are depressed, who are lonely, who can't talk about it, or so traumatized. So in general, you get to people who are willing to talk about it, as long as you set the table right. And I've always been a big believer in how do you set the table, Judy, like you have, for conversation. How do you allow people in? So each interview was a number of days process of talking, and I taped everything because I didn't want to be writing notes while talking with the person. And one of the things I landed on, And I wish it had been a little bit better by Rutgers, but I'm very grateful that they published the book. If those of you who have my book, I bring them in with their words, and their words are centered and in italics in the middle of the page. And I'm the narrator of the rest of their story, but it's their words that anchor the story because I had to be the bearer of their tale, trying to put it in context, trying to share their story, trying to bring it to life, but I'm honoring them and their stories. As I did the interviews, I met with a lot of different people from Houston, Texas, to Clarkston, to LA, to really a lot of places in the country. I sat with people. I heard a lot of pain. I mean, as Sinja, who you met before, and I blanked on her name because every time I see her, I interviewed her. She's now, I think she got a master's degree. I don't know what she's doing in Houston exactly. I met her in a high floor. If any of you have ever been to Houston, a big, big city, looking out over the whole city. I met her with her over the course of 2 days, and the way Sinja tells the story, it was like I was sitting there with her in Baghdad and in everything that happened to her. And we weren't in Houston, Texas. We were in Baghdad or in her village or sitting with her grandfather or hearing the escape of she and her children trying to get to the airport and the failed attempts and how they were almost murdered and the threat on her husband's life and the persecution of the Yazidi people. And to me, I wanted to bring that into, because in these people, and I tried not to focus on horror. I could have written a book, just no one needs to read that. There's some in here. But I'll give you an example. I mentioned I'd come back to Dane Djokovic. Dane Djokovic, born in South Sudan, a place where I had the pleasure of going 2 months before it became its own state. I made a trip to Juba, South Sudan, a world that's on fire right now. Many people fleeing Sudan. Darfur is horrible again. I mean, but Dane, remarkable story. He walked for 1 year, and there's some great quotes from him about holding on to life and holding on to hope. And one of the things that hit me about Dane, he talked about that year journey when he was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. You'd wake up, sleeping out there, and you'd see your friend had died overnight, and how you kept on going. He talked about, we have no choice. We have to keep going on. But Dane is a man of a lot of strength, a lot of courage. But what was the low point of his narrative so far? When he had come to America, and he was in San Jose, and he's tall, 6'4", he's black, and by the way, for many of the refugees who come from Africa, they go from being Eritrean or South Sudanese or this or that, they come to be black in America, which they never bought into. Whole different narrative that they have to escape. One night, walking home from work, 2 guys stopped him and said, "Where are you going?" And he has an accent, obviously. And one of the guys got out of the car and dumped garbage on his head. Dane talks very openly and very vividly about that night, and he went back to his room and cried. And that night he wanted to go back to Kakuma, a refugee camp in northern Kenya, where he spent, I think, 8 or 9 years. And after a couple days sitting in his room and full of despair and anger, he realized that he had hope that life could be different in America. That the guy who poured garbage on him does not represent Americans. That man represented hate and everything about him. But from these people, I've learned a lot about human courage. I've learned about how to hold on to hope. And I've learned a lot about trauma. Everyone here has had trauma in your life. Everyone here has had loss in your life. How does one hold on to that and move ahead? And I realize, and I can share it openly, Marin, the first gentleman up there, was a dear family friend from Eritrea, became a citizen, and he's the one that said, "Hope is the oxygen of my life." That was from the University of San Francisco when he gave the graduation address. He lived through severe trauma in Eritrea, becomes a citizen, runs for city council in Oakland. He loses, but he ran. He put his voice into the American dream, and with all the baggage he carries, and he's a dear friend. He's now going to go on for his doctorate in England. He just got his master's degree from the Goldman School in Berkeley. He's living with a lot of trauma. How do you live in these times? And I'll tell you something that gave me inspiration recently. I showed it to Judy on the airplane coming up here. I love the writer David Brooks. He has a new book coming out about how do we hold other human beings. But Brooks writes about in these times that are tearing our souls apart, how do you hold on? And Brooks has an ability to write in very human terms. I think in these times that are tearing us apart, how do we hold those glimmers of hope, of courage, of resilience, that everything might be dark, but in that darkness there's light and that kind of thing. So to me, these stories are a reminder of the best of humanity, of people who've survived severe trauma, but yet managed to go on.
Thank you. Let me just look at that.
Yeah.
So it's about 5 to 1. What I think I'm going to ask a couple of more questions if people have time, and then turn it over to all of you. Right? I do just want to say that you're most definitely a rabbi, because I think the whole construct of the book is very Talmudic, right? The words of the refugee are on the page, and then you're doing the drash. So thank you for that. And it's actually it's a wonderfully readable format, and I think that you are, thank you so much for your response, but I think it also, you make it very clear you're not appropriating anything. You are really letting these individuals speak for themselves, so that's really, really important. The question's sort of related. You've already mentioned Elie Wiesel, and Wiesel, of course, was really one of, if not the first survivor of the Holocaust to speak out. And he did say this very, very famous quote from Wiesel: "I believe firmly and profoundly that whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. So those who hear us, those who read us, must continue to bear witness." So what does it mean for you to be a witness, to speak as a witness?
Well, that's what drove me to make my first trip. And if you want to hear the real story, you can interview my wife Judy later, and she can give you. But when I was driving home in LA in 2003, and I heard just a minute on NPR about what was the genocide that was going on and the attempt to eliminate the people of Darfur, we started talking about it. And then I came up with this idea. I wanted to go bear witness. And Judy knew she had married someone with some psychiatric disturbances, but she might tell you that proved the point. I'm saying that with great humor. But I was driven to bear witness because of Elie Wiesel, to sit in a place, there's no Jews suffering there, but human beings suffering, to try to understand what was going on, to share that story. But what bearing witness, even before I met, it meant, and this is the whole theme of today, the whole theme is turning hope into action. It's not just enough to go watch people suffering and hear horrible stories of brutality, but how do you make that translatable? How do you turn that into action? How do you, and a lot of the world, it has to do with raising money. In other words, we're not going to have a drive to mail goods over to Darfur. That's not happening. How do you raise money for credible sources that are doing good humanitarian work in a place that's hell on earth to support their work? So the group I went in with is a group called International Medical Corps. I never knew they existed, but I am a person, I'll just give you my bias, Judy, a little bit, is a lot of great work happens on the East Coast, but we on the West, often fundraisers come and they want a lot of our money, and it goes back to the East Coast. And by the way, if you look on the West Coast, this is another article, someone can write this, and what you're doing here in Portland and the wonderful museum and other things, but you look in California, 2 people, one a dear friend, Uri Hersher, who built the Skirball Cultural Center, and the other one, Marvin Heyer, who built the Wiesenthal Center. They both raised over $1 billion, well over $1 billion. They're 2 people that when they were both working, any political candidate would go see. They're not political people, they go see behind the scenes. I think a lot of people gave to those 2 places because they liked that it was going to stay on the West Coast. So International Medical Corps Santa Monica, who are they? They're the American Doctors Without Borders, but they're apolitical. So Doctors Without Borders labels something genocide, but if I go to your house for dinner, Judy, and I just say you and Steve are racist, I might be asked to leave, although you're very polite, but I probably wouldn't be invited back, right? So they are asked to leave country. International Medical Corps stays in country. So I worked with them for a number of years. And, I see the work of people. And so to me, bearing witness had to do with telling stories of hope and telling stories of action. So in Chad, we built a number of clinics. The state of those clinics now, I don't know, but they were sustainable. We worked in a number of local projects, listening to local people. It's always the best people to listen to. They know the best for their country, their region, and what's going on. And I paid a lot of attention to that. So to me, it translated to raising a lot of money, the best I could do, and trying to end the genocide in that part of the world. So it's bearing witness and taking in suffering has to be integrated in some ways, but I'm a big believer of being, people used to say to me, Judy, when I went out for those years and talked about the experiences and I gave it up. I'll tell you why. Because people would say to me, Lee, I can't do what you did. And, oh my God, how'd you have the courage to go there? I'm not a courageous person. I did what was right for me with Judy's support, with my family's support. I did what was right for me at the time. But I really believe we can all do something. At 75 years old, I'm not going into Palestine now. There's a lot of things I can't do. But every day, on my office study, there's a quote by another mentor of mine who I never met, Abraham Joshua Heschel. I'm sure you've heard about from your rabbis and community leaders. Daily we should take account and ask, what have I done today to mitigate the evil, to change the injustice? And what I like about that quote is, what have I done today? Not what did this congressperson do, what did the senator do, what did the rabbi do, what did the museum director do, what did someone with more money than me do? What did I do today in my own way, my own community? Did I do something? Did I do something a little bit to mitigate the evil, to diminish it? So I'm a believer in knowing your niche in life and playing to that and asking and celebrating. Now, just if I can connect that, I saw downstairs a quote by General Dallaire, who I had the privilege of meeting and spending a couple days with. He's the real hero of Rwanda. He saved over 30,000 lives. Remarkable story. His book is The Devil, Shaking Hands with the Devil. And he tells us, I first heard him at the annual dinner of the United States Holocaust Museum, where they gave him, I was privileged to be there, the Elie Wiesel Award. That night I called Judy from DC and I stayed up all night. I said, we've got to bring him to the West Coast. He makes it so human and so real. There's devils everywhere. There's terrible people. But most people are good and decent and want to be uplifted. And that's why I like David Brooks' work. How are we going to better listen to people who might differ? Or on Thursday when I had lunch with my friend Clyde, it wasn't so bad. We have different political answers, but you know what? I applaud him, he's in the arena. I applaud that he's not standing on the sidelines. What can I do today? Bearing witness we can all do in our lives each and every day.
Thank you.
I get excited. I thank you, Judy, for bearing.
I'm feeling more hopeful. I have lots more questions, but let me just turn it to the audience. Steve Reinish has a question. Mariah's going to help with the mic.
Thank you, and a pleasure having you here, Rabbi, so thank you for your words of wisdom. I'd like you to imagine something, if you would, please, before the question I want to pose. Imagine that Judy Margles is not sitting in the chair next to you. Rather, imagine that there's an intelligent, vibrant university student from one of the East Coast universities who's been raging against Israel and championing the Palestinian cause and trying to make it a moral equivalent in terms of their objections to how Israel has handled Palestine with the atrocities that Hamas has committed. Imagine that that's the person there. Now tell us how the conversation would unfold.
I love the question. What is your name, sir?
Steve Reinish.
Hi, Steve.
A board member.
Hi, Steve. Judy, you're the young undergraduate that Steve's talking about. You don't have to answer everything I'm going to say.
No, I'm throwing darts at you.
Yeah. I'm really glad to meet you. And I'm not doing this just to be trite, by the way. It's not a trite answer. Tell me how you got involved. When did you get involved with supporting the Palestinians? What brought you into the movement?
Oh, I think the Israelis are Nazis.
How do you base that? How did you come to that opinion?
Because the Palestinians are oppressed.
Yeah. And Judy, is there any other side to it, or is that the only side to it?
That's the only side. The Palestinians, do you know how long the Palestinians have been oppressed by the Israelis?
Mm. Judy, what are you studying here at Columbia?
Engineering.
Engineering. Where'd you grow up, Judy? Plattsburgh, New York.
Plattsburgh, New York.
Okay, so I want to take it. You're a great role player. I don't want to start there. I'm not going to start with what's going on. I want to ask the person about themselves. They have a story. They got there for a reason. And I think Judy captures it well. When you saw the rally here in downtown, there was a little rally here in downtown Portland. I don't know how big, but I saw a bunch of flags. It's the narrative of, if you look at, it's very interesting. I watched the CBS Sunday morning show. Yeah, that's my favorite show because it's unlike all the rest of the BS on TV. It's kind of that there was now whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. Who's making an issue of age in the next, because it's a year from today is the next presidential election, and this commentator, who's making an issue of the age issue? Democrats make more of an issue than Republicans do. And Trump is no young guy, as we all know. And I say that because I want to be brought into the story. That the people out here demonstrating are in Berkeley or San Francisco or in DC, yesterday, DC was yesterday, right? Or, yeah, 90,000 people I think they got. They're hanging on to the narrative of oppression, and there is oppression. So what I would say to the person, first I want to hear how they got connected, why they think that. Then I would try to walk into, young Judy, I would say it in this kind of patronizing way, but then, would you be open to hearing a little bit of why I see it differently? I'd ask permission. Would you be open to hearing it a little bit differently? And I think one-on-one, most people are. I'd say, do you know that Israel, that in 1947 there was a partition by the United Nations of an Israeli state and a Palestinian state? And did you know that the Palestinians and the Arab countries rejected it and said, you're going to be back home before you know it, that we're going to defeat the small Israeli state? Well, it didn't work out that way. Since then, there's been a lot of horror on both sides. I would give room. People don't want to be dismissed or diminished. I try to give room. And I would say there's been a lot of horror on both sides. Israel's not started any wars. Have they treated people in Gaza and West Bank in the best way possible? Absolutely not. Has the Arab world treated people in the West Bank and Gaza any better? No. And I would try to walk slowly and carefully in saying, how do we hold, we want to support the people who feel oppressed, but is there still a role for facts and knowledge and information? Steve, what's heartbreaking? What is heartbreaking in this world today is that whatever President Trump, the former president, gave voice to, he gave voice to facts don't matter, right? He gave voice to that movement. And I would try to hold that and listen to that and work slowly through it. I believe in taking the time, but see, that's not a rushed conversation. Because what am I trying to get at? The human story. Why did this young woman, why did she identify with PLO? I would try to make it real. What was her upbringing like? Who else is oppressed? How does she stand with the oppressed? What do we do about Native Americans? See, in the Bay Area, I don't know if this is popular here in Portland, but everywhere you go, were there Native American tribes here in Portland? So everywhere in the Bay Area, at the University of San Francisco, every program begins, we sit here today on the land of the Ohlone tribe. So every program begins like that. But let's be fair. Native Americans have really gotten a raw deal. Really gotten a raw deal. How do you stand with the oppressed? How do you go beyond the headlines, and how do you enter into real conversations? And there I would add, I'm no longer 19 years old, but I know the passion I had of oppressive causes. I know that I didn't want to look at facts, but to try to bring people in a little bit more humanly, not by diminishing them, by holding them in. Does that work at all for you, Steve? I'm curious. Does that answer in any way do anything for you?
What you're basically saying is what we all should have learned at home from our parents and grandparents, and then in school and civics classes, which is sadly lacking now. And you are advocating we need to restore a level of civility and humanity to discussions that can still be spirited and polar opposite in conclusion, but yet speak with love.
And that's why I love work, said beautifully, Steve. That's why I love work that is more intensive than just a conference. One time, so for example, I ran a place called the Brandeis Bardeen Institute, a conference center that no longer exists in Southern California. I've always been a believer in role playing and trying to put, I do this with tourist study, I do this with lots of things. We do a role play sometimes about kashrut, the laws of kosher. So I would say to the audience, anybody here that live by the rules of kosher? I'll never forget Mrs. Steinberg from Las Vegas. She said, Lee, people call me Lee. I'm very strict kosher. I said, Mrs. Steinberg, would you please come up? I said, is there anybody here in the audience who just, the laws of kashrut, they're ancient history, give me my shrimp and my ham and everything. And the guy came up, whatever his name was. So I said, great, you're ready for a discussion on that? Oh man, am I ready? I said, okay, well, it's going to be a little bit different today. Mrs. Steinberg, speak in the first person why the laws of kashrut are ridiculous. And Mr. Jones, you speak about why you keep a kosher home. Steve, I got to tell you, these discussions, when you ask people to role play, but again, in this kind of role play on the Palestinian and Israeli, my guess is that young Palestinian woman couldn't say one thing about Israel. So I would probably say in a conversation, what do you know about Israel besides being what you call Nazis or what you call us terrible? Do you know, you ever met a young person your age from Israel? Do you ever read any Israeli literature, any contemporary authors? Before you say a group is Nazis, do you think, is there any responsibility of knowing more about them? So I'm not a great talk show host because my answers are not quick and, like we see on TV and we're bombarded. I believe in process. It doesn't work for everyone, but I've been in very tough rooms, where when you start to boil it down, maybe you get somewhere. But there has to be a commitment to that. If I just want to yell at you, Steve, but we used to do that at the Aspen Institute. See, I think curiosity is a great thing we have as human beings. If you and I were talking, Steve, and Steve said he's all for capital punishment, and I said I'm all against capital punishment, like abortion in America, all these issues. Steve, we've lost the art of conversation. And this is what I love about David Brooks' work. I want to engage. I can't engage with anyone who's going to yell at me and say that I support Nazis and all that. If I try to go further and they can't go, I might as well bang my head against that wall. But if someone's willing to engage with humility in a conversation where we try to learn something, and what's so interesting, I got one of these too, right? In a world where facts are so accessible, we often want to rage and yell at each other, and we don't pause to take the time. Wow, I never knew that there was 2 states in 47. Well, let's take a minute and pull it up. Let's look at what the facts are. But it's got to be owning. But the other part, Stephen, forgive me for going on this question, is I had lunch with a group of 5 guys, invited me to a small luncheon group. And one of the guys raised last week, it's my first luncheon, are we the elite that Trump's peoples, go on and on about? And my answer to that is, I don't think of myself as elite, but I am elite. I'm a person of privilege. Look at my life. And most of us, I don't want to speak for everyone in the room, but anyone in academia, anyone with a certain amount of means, most people who are white, we are part of an elite. So when I see that rally, I'm uncomfortable because it goes right against my core narrative of my love for Israel, of Leon Uris and Exodus, of that world. It goes against that. But hey, that ain't the world of 2023. And I'll end this question, take a few more, but Steve, it goes, we have some friends in Marin, and they were planning a family vacation. They were lamenting, oh my God, to go to Hawaii now, this is about a year or two ago, is so expensive. When we rented a house 5 years ago, and it was this price. And then they ultimately asked, what would I do? And my answer is, I don't mean this to be glib. Well, I said, if I have a time machine, I'd go back 5 years ago and rent the house at that same price I paid 5 years ago. If I want to take my family on vacation in 2023, I'd pay the price they're asking, or I'd find another house. That world makes me uncomfortable. I don't like it. It's not my narrative. It's not who I am. But unless I want to crawl in a hole, I got to listen to it and try to be there with it. And honor my own narrative too, not dismiss my narrative and how proud I am.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
I wanted to learn more about your book and just like your process for writing it, your inspiration, and just how you found people to interview.
Great question. What is your name?
Gabby.
And Gabby, are you a student or you just live up here?
Yeah, I live here.
And what brought you today, Gabby? I'm curious.
My mom actually found it, and she was like, why don't we go to this? Because this is something we're both just the Holocaust. We've had experiences where we actually met a Holocaust survivor, and we really got to know him. So we just wanted to learn just more about this, because it's something we're just passionate about.
Terrific. So, great question. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming today. So, I used my network of sources through International Medical Corps, through HIAS, which I've been involved in, International Rescue Committee, and I called local people, and some things I stumbled upon. So, Dane, South Sudanese guy, I was reading a thing about a woman that had sponsored him in a talk he gave in Sacramento, California, our capital in California. I called up that woman. We met and had lunch, great conversation, and she said, you want to meet Dane? I said, well, yeah, but he lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She said, you want to meet him? I said, yeah. She flew him out. So people did wonderful things. Some I always had to be screened and vetted generally by, Vanny, the woman I spoke, Cambodian woman, she lives in Oakland. First I had to meet with her social worker and therapist to be vetted. Then I met with the therapist and Vanny, and then she determined she felt safe with me. And I think people understood that I was in no rush, that I was trying to get at their story. And that we would meet for an hour, hour and a quarter, and then I'd say, let's have a cup of tea, can we have a snack together? You want to get some fresh air? Judy wonderfully would say, let's catch our breath. Or is this too much for you today, Vanny? So then I used connections in different ways. Sidonia was a Holocaust survivor that I met many years ago in LA. I reconnected with her, and her story in the book is what I love about Sidonia, and again, I'm going to say it very clearly, life is tough. A lot of great things in life and a lot of tough things. I'm not judgmental. I try never to judge anyone else how they hold their pain. It's their pain. We all grieve. We all mourn. We all deal with our trauma in different ways. But Sidonia made a commitment. So for many years, even as an elderly person, she went on the trip to Poland, March of the Living. I don't know if you've ever heard that, where people come from all around the world. She went as an elderly woman on that trip and told her story. And at the core of her story was when she and her family were hiding in a bunker. And she was going out every day from that bunker and looking for scraps to eat. And one day her dad said, I'm going to go get you an apple to eat. And he found, after I think being gone several weeks, I forget exactly how the story goes, came back with an apple. He gave it to her and he said, Sidonia, I have to go out again. She never saw her father again. Wherever she goes, she used to give out green apples of celebrating her father who was deceased. And again, if Sidonia had locked herself into an apartment here in Portland, never met with anyone in Jewish family service or wherever you have up here was delivering, I get it. How do you go on? And what struck me about these people, and there were people whose stories didn't land for me in the way of they couldn't be that open. Like I interviewed a woman, when I went to Clarkston, I interviewed a woman, young woman, about your age who was born inside a refugee camp. Now that's quite something, and you have that with a lot of Palestinian refugees, born inside refugee camps. What does it mean to give your address as a refugee camp? There were stories that I couldn't get enough at to tell, and that would be informative, and that bring people into a narrative that might move them. But I met a lot of people, I learned a lot, and I give credit to even the refugees I didn't include in my book, because I learned something from all of them. But it's, what I would say, Gabby, right? What's your name? Gabby. And you have it by being here today in your question. It's being curious in the human story. How'd you get here? Who are you? And what brings you here today? What moves you? If I ever write another book, I don't know if I will. Right now, I don't think I will, but it would be on moral courage and hope. How do you have Varian Fry, Judy mentioned, be a great exhibit? Where do we find moral courage to do the little things? That when someone makes fun of a group of people in our presence, to say, I'm not comfortable with you making fun of that group, or that even though, look again, all the things going on in our world today, and all the things, again, I didn't grow up in a world where there were people that are transgender, but I get it as much as someone who's not transgender, but I know in my discomfort, I gotta listen to more of those stories. That I gotta hold on to that. It's a world, so if I wanna remain alive, even though I'm old, Gabby, I'm gonna be 75, until my dying day, I want to be able to learn, just like all of you came out here this afternoon. So I know something about all of you. There's a lot to do in Portland on a nice day. There's other things going on in this world, I'm sure, that you all brought something. There's a reason why you're here. How do we uplift that, hold on to that, and inspire others to be in rooms like this?
You're gonna get the mic here. You deserve the mic.
First I have to tell you, you're not old. So stop saying I'm old.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. My wife agrees with you. Thank you.
Look, you don't know what old is. Okay. So leave age alone. There are other things to do in Portland today. I want to tell you that Chinese Garden has chrysanthemum month. And they have a beautiful display of chrysanthemums, not only the fresh flowers, but usually artwork. But I came here today because I wanted to hear an intelligent response to what's going on in Israel and Gaza. I'm very pleased because you have said many things that I agree with. However, there's always a but, right?
Of course.
But your response to how to discuss things with people who disagree with you, to me seems, I apologize, Pollyanna, because you're assuming the person you're discussing with has an open mind. And that's what frightens me. Frightens me to open my mouth with some of the people I know who hold opposing views. Like I have somebody I know who many years ago said the solution to the Palestinian-Israeli problem is kill all the Arabs.
Yeah.
He also wants to kill all the blacks. Yeah. So I'm leery of getting into such a conversation. However, I do respect what you're saying, and I'm listening and maybe gaining something from it. One other point I want to make, you briefly addressed the indigenous people of this country, and I was hoping that somewhere along the line more would have been said about that. And also, the young man, was it from Eritrea, who had the garbage dumped on him?
From South Sudan. Dave.
South Sudan,
Yeah.
okay. From South Sudan. Unfortunately, too many refugees who come to this country who have black skins where they never even thought about themselves as being black, and they come to this country and then they're in the mess that we've made. So there's a lot going on that I just wish with all my education, all the degrees I have, I would know what to do. So I thank you for giving me some insights.
Well, I really appreciate, what's your name?
I'm going to tell you my name now. Listen carefully.
Yeah.
It's Beatrice with an L.
Oh, wow.
It's
Beatrice.
a variation of Beatrice. In Italian, Beatrice. But I'm Beatrice. Beatrice Kaplan. Thank you.
So, Beatrice, thank you, and I appreciate the but, because the buts are very important. As I said, I can't work with someone, right? There's no reason for that person or me, unless there's an open mind. In other words, that someone who says, all blacks should be killed, or whatever it is. But sometimes, and my wife Judy was present with, this was a serious fundraising visit with some people I knew well. Went to these people's home, and the woman, in this case, the husband was very quiet. She wanted to go on a whole rant with me about the organization that gay people are uplifted and supported, and how much that gay people and lesbians are destroying us, and also when Jews marry non-Jews, it went against everything I believe. I listened very carefully. And by the way, she kept saying how much she likes me. Then I said to this woman, I said, tell me a little bit more about you, because I knew a little bit more about her. She has 2 nephews who are both gay. She does everything in the world for them. She has her people who marry non-Jews who she loves and uplifts and everything. Basically, we live in a time where, forgive the language, Beatrice, there's a lot of garbage talk. A lot of crap, forgive the language, spews out of people's mouths. Sometimes, if you let people spew it out and don't react to it, I can get somewhere. If I feel someone's just totally closed-minded, doesn't want to hear any other perspective, why waste their time away? Why waste my time? But I think a lot of people, it like stunned me when I met my friend on Thursday. I did not expect him to talk about how painful he found the Hamas attack. It's the first time I've seen him connected to Israel or his Jewish identity in 40 years that I've known him. So it really struck me that if I had just ruled him out, I would have never had an entry ground to start a conversation of reasonableness. How do we deal with people who are unreasonable? That's a very tough question. But being able to ask it, Beatrice, like you, and by the way, I'm glad you mentioned the garden. There's beauty out there in this world. There's joy out there in this world. There's, and by the way, I don't get hung up with being old, but I will tell you, Beatrice, for my birthday, you may find this unusual, I'm not having any adults to my birthday party. No, I do. I have a kid's birthday party just with my grandkids. Because it's the least complicated thing I do. It's fun. Because I look, Beatrice, people have asked often, Lee, you've gone to all these horrific situations in Haiti and Rwanda. You've been all, how do you go on living? I hold that, but I also hold fun and joy. I hold fun and beautiful gardens and people who care. I have to let that speak to me, because otherwise I wouldn't have any hope of what we can do in our limited way in Portland or San Francisco or wherever we are. Can we make a difference? We can.
Your lips to her ears.
We have a couple more questions. Are we good for a couple more questions? Wonderful. 2 more questions and then we'll.
I'd like to pose it as a question. I'm not sure I will be able to, but
Sure.
I like the comment you made about civic education. And what I think back to, and I'm talking about immigrants and refugees to our country right now, and the incredible hostility we see. And I work with ERCO. I'm on one of the Africa House advisory report. And one of the things that I see is, let me back it up. I come out of St. Louis, Missouri, daughter of a Holocaust fleer. Both grandparents died in camps. But I went to public schools, and we had civics education. And since at least 1980, and I won't mention the president that encouraged us to start doing more and more alternatives to public education, homeschooling and the rest, we're seeing that increase more and more and more. And unless we can figure out, and this is where it doesn't sound like a question, but I want to throw it at you, unless we can figure out how to get back to integrating our communities, our new residents with our older residents and their children and grandchildren in an educational environment where they learn about what democracy is and what civic engagement is and respect is, I think we've lost it. And that's a very depressing statement, but you've been very positive, so take it away.
Thank you very much. I just would say a word on that. And it's a hard reckoning, because again, it's like the Eleanor Roosevelt statement down below, is how do we deal with it personally? So the state I come from, California, there's no civics. I haven't been to any school where there's civics. We've eliminated everything. So if you blame Governor Reagan, what do? Well, it's really the generation that came before me. It had to do with homeowners tax and real estate taxes. I wasn't yet voting, but voted with their pocketbooks. When you vote with your pocketbooks, I understand. We're all human. We all, money is something we worry about to a certain extent. But how do you see society? How do you see public education? Public education is the core of this great country. And let's be honest, we don't value it enough. I mean, we're not putting enough into public education. And when I had the privilege, and I'll just weave this in, of spending a couple years with Robert Redford, who's really a decent, down-to-earth guy, he would talk, and again, no one's going to do this, but he had the right idea. And we had a symposium on public education with students and teachers and educators and funders and everybody. Bob's image was the following: what do we do? And this is true of somebody. He said, we have a problem here with this table and the setup. So, and you can take it as a metaphor. We're going to move allocation of funds here, and we're going to do this with teachers and with administrators, and we move things around. And I'll never forget when Bob said the following. I loved it. That isn't how you solve problems. Dump the whole table over. Dump the whole darn thing over and say, how are we going to deal with public education? Well, okay, it starts with students. What should students learn? What does it mean to be an educated and informed America? Teachers. How do you want to treat teachers? But we're not there. And there, I would say, a harsh statement. And I have many friends who have been politicians and elected officials who I think mean well. There's something wrong about how we're governing America. There's something really, really wrong that we have to take a hard look at. I wish I knew the answer to that. I have no one. I'm good at questions, but questions around smart people I often learn so much from that inform me. But we have a country where everyone's knows everything. That again, when I'm with people who know everything, I listen a bit. I want to be with people who are curious, who are grappling with things, who are trying to figure out, and that we accept on my desk also is a Martin Luther King quote. Besides, whatever, I'm not going to say it right, but in the spirit of finite disappointment, we must find infinite hope. That's a nice little quote, but what is it? How do I find hope? That's up to each of us. How do I find a little glimmer of hope? The work you're doing with refugees, with literacy, with homelessness. We're not solving the whole problems, but can I do my little part with whatever my strengths are to bring a little bit more peace on this planet? So I appreciate your speaking.
David, do you want the last question?
Give it to David.
Hi, thank you, Rabbi. First of all, thank you
You're very welcome, David.
very much for being here today, and also thank you for all the work that you have you do and you have done. When I retired 10 years ago, I decided that I knew what I wanted to retire to. I was happy working, but I knew what I wanted to retire to, and it was spending a lot of time working with immigrants and refugees. So I used some of my previous experiences and searched out new opportunities to do that. And I found it both rewarding and frustrating, as you pointed out. And I sort of thought that after in the Obama administration, when we could see and read about what was happening with Syrian refugees, that including the government of Syria gassing their citizens, that maybe that would resonate more powerfully with people, especially people in the United States, and that we would see some relief in terms of how we dealt with refugees and some of our policies, and quite clearly that hasn't happened. And there have been a series of situations since then, and many situations, unresolved situations. Darfur, you mentioned, that's 20 years of genocide. It's continuing today, and there's almost 1 million people in the camps in eastern Chad now. I know very well from one of the organizations that I do work with. So I guess what I'd like to hear from you is, what do you think realistically? I'm an optimist. The reason I stay involved in this particular area of focus is because I'm an optimist. I do think that there's an upside, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you think the situation in terms of refugees and immigration in the United States will look like 3 or 5 years from now, realistically? I know you're an optimist as well, but what is it that we should reasonably be able to expect that will be different 3 to 5 years from now, and why?
Great question. And first of all, I applaud the work you're doing with immigrants and refugees. One of the things that every one of these people and everyone I've always met with, it goes down. I was thinking of Asinja in Houston and how she told me about the nice lady who taught her the Houston bus system. And things that we all take for granted. Hannah Arendt put it beautifully in a quote of that. What does it mean to be a refugee? You lose familiarity with everything. Home and language and culture and norms. And so people who do that everyday work were lifesavers. The second part, and I'll get directly to the question, it is overwhelming. I mean, go downstairs and spend another 20 minutes. Darfur, Ukraine, Afghanistan. I mean, we could list it. What do I do? What's more important? And the Israel-Hamas war is touching us all very personally, very deeply, in a way that probably the others don't. How do I deal with it? And I'll give you my sense of where we might be going. Is I deal with it by supporting, and that means writing emails, notes to people who I know who work or live in dangerous areas. So I'm in touch with everyone. I have no family in Israel. I try to send weekly messages, or every other week, a little message to everyone we know, thinking about you with love and support and prayers for peace. I don't know if those are the right words or not, but I know, by the way, how important it is to be remembered in a time of need. How much we all need that, right? That people just want to be known. Then I call people also who share very different political views than me, a guy that teaches at the University of San Francisco, who's very involved with Palestinians and everything in a very serious intellectual level. I call him this week to say, how you doing? How are things going for you? What's it like being Jewish and being where you are politically? He loved, people appreciate it. Just personally about all these things, and this used to be a big part of me when I was out raising money for humanitarian causes. We all, how to put it, those people who have business backgrounds, if someone came to you, if I said, David, let's buy this piece of property here in downtown Portland, and you'd say to me all the business questions that you may know better than me, what's the projections of the future, what's the return on investment, all that. But people generally don't give with any strategy. So my advice there, unsolicited, if you're giving internationally, always look at charitynavigator.com. Don't make a contribution. Many of these things that appear on TV, $20 a month supports a kid, look at their overhead ratio, it's terrible. So I strategically support, so what am I doing with Israel and Palestine? I'm supporting groups in Israel like Magen David Adom. I happen to like politically the work of New Israel Fund and others who are on the ground there. I also am, and again, I'm a guest, so if you want to run me out of town, International Medical Corps, my former group, was run by a Lebanese woman. Their website I love. I look at a lot of websites. First of all, I know they've been vetted. Charity Navigator, they say we don't work in Israel, but we applaud the work of our partner, the Joint Distribution Committee, who's active, and they put in the link there, which I always worry when other groups don't put in other groups, and they're active in Gaza. I've sent in some money to support their work in Gaza. I have to as a human being. But I can't carry all of this because we're suffering from catastrophe fatigue about the human condition. So we all can only carry a certain amount. What's the future? I think the future, 3, 4, 5 years, will be better defined on November 5th, 2024, when the American population, we will vote for a president who will be open to immigration reform and know it's difficult. And by the way, the Biden administration has done stuff we don't like. I mean, there's stuff that they're not doing that's not all that great, but there's a spirit that's different. There's a spirit of compassion and hope. Are we going to elect a president and an administration that cares more about this issue, or are we going to go back to an administration that worries about everyone coming in, taking from us? So that's, to me, but it goes back to my friend's question about civics and voting. I think the most important thing we can do is vote, make sure everyone gets out and vote, and we elect a president that reflects our wishes. I know in a minute Judy's going to conclude this. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate being here and to be with a group of people, and I wish we had all the time in the world. I'm not rushing out afterwards, but I do have to rush to the restroom, but then I plan on coming back into the room if anyone wants to ask more, learn more, or talk more. But Judy, I'll turn it over to you. But thank you, Judy. I thank you and the museum and Gail and Erwin and Liz and everyone who helped bring me here. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, it's been one very, very good thing. Gail wants to say something.
Very important question, Rabbi.
Yes, Gail.
I want to know how it really feels to be 75.
We share the same birthday.
Oh, that's right.
But she's younger by 20 years.
Yeah, I'm jumping by 20 years. I was just going to, because I loved this quote. I think I didn't write down who said it. I think it was David Bycel who did a review of your book. And he just, was it? Did he?
David Ellison did a review.
Oh, David Ellison.
Yeah,
That's who it was.
yeah.
I'm so sorry. I got my Davids mixed up. And he said, Jewish tradition teaches words that come from the heart enter the heart of the listener. I'm going to leave us with that.
Oh,
Because I think it really is.